Okay. Okay.
And we are recording.
All right. Okay. So, welcome everybody. Um, this is an exciting occasion. This event is being sponsored being organized primarily by a group called Justice Advocates. We're a group of people intent on learning more about social justice related issues in Roanoke and the New River Valley, and eventually learning how to take action concerning those. Tonight, we're learning about two African American schools, which I, at least having lived here for 33 years, knew barely anything about. One of these is the Calfee Training School in Pulaski, Virginia, and the other is the Carver School in Salem, Virginia. We have with us here tonight three people who have firsthand experience of these institutions and can tell us something about their history and also a little, I'm hoping, about what happened when 1966 came and integration came and the students attending those schools were transferred to majority white schools and what that was like and what the transition was like. So we have Dr. Mickey Hickman, who's the president of the Calfee Community and Cultural Center Board of Directors. He attended Calfee, then the Christiansburg Institute, which were the primary and secondary schools that served to educate Black children at that time during segregation. He graduated from Pulaski High School, then he went on to Virginia Tech and Radford University. And he worked for Pulaski County Public Schools for 42 years, and he also did lots of sports, I can see, which I didn't know before, but he may tell us about. Dr. Marilyn Harmon is someone whose roots run deep in local history and the history of our country, really. Her parents studied at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama as high school students because Virginia at the time did not offer education for Black students beyond ninth grade. One of their instructors at the Tuskegee Institute was the famous scientist George Washington Carver. I was pleased to see he was a botanist. I was a plant biologist for my entire professional life. And Dr. Harmon's father was principal of Carver School in Salem, and her mother taught there. They also were associated with Thurgood Marshall in some litigation that was extremely important in the history of our country and eventually went on to Brown versus Board of Education. So we're very lucky to have these people with us to educate us about this neglected and very important issue. So I guess we'll begin with Dr. Hickman, and he will tell us a little bit about Calfee.
Well, thank you so much for having me, inviting me to this esteemed group. And I love talking about Calfee Training School, so there's no issue here. The thing will be knowing when to cut me off. But I attended Calfee Training School grades 1 through 7. I entered the first grade the 1955-56 school year. And I went all 7 years there. I actually attended 2 years of Christiansburg Institute, 8th grade and 9th grade. I had gotten word that they were going to close down Christiansburg Institute. So I actually went to Pulaski High in the 1964-65 school year as a sophomore. But what I would say about the Calfee School is later on, I learned that we were disadvantaged. When I was attending school there, I was unaware of that. I had 7 teachers, each that showed me love, care. We had rigor in our classes. I was able to do school. I was recognized and praised and encouraged. by each of my teachers there. That was a common theme. And as a result of this, we're going to show a short video toward the end that explains what we're about today. We're resurrecting this Calfee school. It's sat dormant for a lot of years. And it used to sadden me to drive by that school just to see it sitting that way, because I just remember, my memories are so fond of that school. The social activity was great. We didn't have a lot of material resources. We played hopscotch, drew the diagrams in the dirt. We played marbles. We drew rings and things. And we didn't have actually balls with air in them. We made balls out of milk cartons and put gravels and things in them and played games like that. Played pass like we were playing football, and jump rope. Sometimes someone would find a piece of rope and bring. And so we had some, we made do with what we had. We didn't know we were being underprivileged there with resources and things. What I came to find out later, and I was completely unaware of this, is the fabulous political history of my school. It was only after I was approached. You've heard my bio. I taught for 42 years in the Pulaski County school system. In fact, I never left school until just recently. I've already either matriculated, was studying on a campus, or I was attending at Calfee. I was approached about being a part of this Calfee training school project, and then I became aware of the history. It's remarkable. Professor Green has already alluded to the fact that there was litigation there. This is in the late 1930s. And what you need to understand, that everyone, I think, is aware of Dr. Martin Luther King and his involvement in the civil rights movement. But the civil rights movement actually started with the NAACP. And in the 1930s, they were quite active going after segregation in the South, Jim Crow segregation. And to begin with, they attacked, they used the words in Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal facilities. So they attacked that because our facilities, I've already alluded to some of our conditions, were not equal. And so they attacked the unequal facilities and the unequal salaries that our teachers were made. Marilyn can talk more to that about how her father and her mother, who were both teachers at Calfee, were not paid at the same rate. Thurgood Marshall met Chauncey Harmon, Marilyn's father, at a teachers conference, I believe in Hampton, and approached him. And Thurgood Marshall was an attorney for the NAACP then, and he was looking for test cases for schools and individuals that they might use with the NAACP to possibly launch litigation. And when he found out Mr. Harmon was from the Southwest Virginia part of the state, that was an area, that was fertile ground for him that he would like to explore. They didn't have many cases there. So he approached Mr. Harmon, and Mr. Harmon agreed to do that. Now, you've heard about Mr. Harmon going to Tuskegee Institute in Tuskegee, Alabama at a very young age. Dr. George Washington Carver being his teacher. The Tuskegee Institute, Dr. Carver, those are national threads in our fabric. Thurgood Marshall is another national thread. He came to Pulaski on what the kids nowadays refer to on the down low. He wanted to come in and he didn't want the powers to be to get wind of what was going on. It just so would happen, Mr. Harmon got appointed to principal in 1938, but at that same time, he was launching litigation for unequal facilities and unequal salaries. There was a co-plaintiff, a friend of his, another teacher, Mr. Willie Davis, and he's quite remarkable too. He later on goes on to be a professor, and he taught your own Nikki Giovanni, or Virginia Tech's Nikki Giovanni. So we have a lot of dots being connected here.
It's Willis Gravely.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say Davis? Yes, Willis Gravely. I'm sorry. Thank you, Marilyn. Step in any time like that because I'm trying to go faster. To make a long story short, there were two Calfee schools, the present school and one that existed prior. That was the school that Mr. Harmon first taught at. That school mysteriously burned down after the litigation was launched. And even though the fire department was only 2 blocks away, it took more than 2 hours for the department to get there. So as a result, the school was completely destroyed. Mr. Harmon was very smart and found a way he partnered with the churches, the Black churches, and the education went on for the rest of that year, 38 and to the spring of 39. In the spring of 39, Mr. Gravely and Mr. Harmon were no longer retained. The school board didn't need their services anymore. So they supremely sacrificed their jobs and things. So I'll let Marilyn fill in more on that. The litigation died out because the way I understand it, they no longer had a standing to sue. They didn't want the female teachers to be involved in the litigation. There were female teachers there at Calfee as well. So they took the brunt of this because they predicted correctly something could happen to them in their job, and they didn't want this happening to the female teachers. There was another prominent Black individual in Pulaski, Dr. Percy Casino Corbin. He was a Black doctor, medical doctor. He had gained cachet in Pulaski because there was before, the first time I heard the word pandemic, it surrounded Dr. Corbin. There was a Spanish influenza pandemic in 1918 in Pulaski. And Dr. Corbin and a couple of white doctors formed a trio of doctors that made house calls, went around to homes in Pulaski County and saved many lives. Dr. Corbin even developed a serum that seemed to be working. So race went out the door. When people were sick and all, they were glad to get Dr. Corbin to come in his house. So he had friends and things. And so a new Calfee school was built. They approached Dr. Corbin again. His son, youngest son, Mahatma Corbin, was going to Christiansburg Institute. He wanted him to be a doctor. Mahatma Corbin couldn't even go to the libraries there because of segregation. So Dr. Corbin, again at the bequest of the NAACP, launched another lawsuit. It was Corbin versus Pulaski County School Board. And this is in 1947, I believe it was. 2 NAACP attorneys, Spotswood Robinson and Oliver Hill, took the lead on those cases. And then another an attorney, Martin, joined later. But at the 2 years before the federal judge, Alfred Barksdale, would entertain the case. And he finally did. And he ruled against Dr. Corbin and the NAACP and the plaintiffs, said that there was no discrimination. Yeah, there were bad conditions and things, but white students in white schools in Pulaski County had bad conditions also. So he dismissed the case and wanted the NAACP and the plaintiffs to pay for court costs. Well, they appealed the case, and in the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals, that decision was reversed. And this was one of the successes that the NAACP needed to continue on. And I could tell you more. All I would say is this about the history of the litigation is Pulaski County became that close to being a nationally prominent case, more so than what it is now. Oliver Hill and Robinson, they were on their way to Pulaski. They had filed papers to go beyond fighting unequalization and unequal salaries. They were fighting for desegregation for Black kids to go to school with white kids. And that was a bold move back then. And they were going to use the Pulaski School, Calfee School, as their grounds because they had got a foothold in the court system with their victory, with their Corbin victory. Well, it just so happened 2 days before they were coming to Pulaski, a young lady in Farmville, Virginia, named Barbara Johns, led a protest, and they walked out of the school in Prince Edward County. And they asked for help from the NAACP lawyers in Richmond. So they sent word to Robinson and Hill, and they agreed to stop by there on their way to Pulaski. Well, they stopped, and they thought they would get the students back in the school and they could discourage them of the protest and all. And it turned out they couldn't. And the students were resolute. So as a result, they stayed around in Farmville, and they said, well, look, we'll help you with your case if your parents will agree to fight for segregation. If they'll sign a petition that they'll stand behind the NAACP going for the segregation. They all did. Just one more fact, Barbara Johns, like I said, led the protest. They decided not to get the Johns family in trouble. So they picked a student, her last name was Davis. And so she became the chief plaintiff in the case. So you'll see us Davis versus Prince Edward County. And that's one of the cases that used for Brown versus the Board of Education. And the last thing is the logic that they were able to argue. They listened to the arguments that the white lawyers used to defend the school system, and that they were able to develop a defense. And Thurgood Marshall credits the Pulaski case with providing him the legal cant to argue successfully in Brown versus the Board of Education. So, okay. Marilyn, step in.
Well, I'll kind of backtrack and then move forward too. In the mentioning of the schools stopping at ninth grade, my father looked like this when he left home at 14 going on 15 to go to Alabama to finish high school. He skipped 11th grade because he was tested out and skipped a grade. So that meant they were well educated. This is how he looked when he returned home. And so you can see the youngness, and to think that at the age of 14, 15, you're leaving home to go away to a strange place to be educated, but how important education was. My mother, 2 years later, went to Tuskegee. Her parents put her on the train when she became a ninth grader and sent her to Alabama to be at Tuskegee. And as Dr. Hickman said, they were both taught by Dr. Carver. And my father worked for Dr. Carver. My mother prepared his meals in the dining hall. And Dr. Carver was also their Sunday school teacher. So they were around him all of the time. And 30 years later, they ended up at Carver School in Salem. But Carver School in Salem and Calfee have some things that are parallel. In the looks of the school when my father left, this is a school when it burned, but it was dilapidated. There were holes in the floors and lack of plumbing. And when he came back as a man, it was still the same. And after the lawsuit and the fight, they ended up with this from school out of the lawsuit. But it was Thurgood Marshall, J. Thomas Hewen, Spotswood Robinson, and Oliver Hill were part of the attorney case. Thurgood Marshall, because of lack of accommodations for African Americans and hotels, stayed at my grandmother's house, my father's house. And so he handled the case. Now, Pulaski was the first in the state of Virginia to march on the Board of Education and successfully make waves to open and get a new school. Once the fight began, my father wrote a letter after attending the NACP conference, but it was the National Teachers Association conference. And it was at that conference that he wrote to Hewen and Marshall. Hewen said, you need to talk to Thurgood. So he sat down and he wrote a letter. Dr. Wayne Tripp found that letter in the Library of Congress. And so when Dr. Tripp was writing his dissertation, he discovered that in his research. And I will never fail to acknowledge my thanks to Dr. Tripp for using my father as a subject. And then to tell that story, and then Kendall Payne and Keith McCoy for putting it on stage. And it's going to be another stage play on it, beginning September the 16th through the 19th at the Adair Theater in Pulaski. And Kendall and Keith tell the story on stage of this lawsuit, of my father's growing up. Dr. Tripp's dissertation ended up to be this. And it's over 400 pages. I didn't know he could find that much on my dad. And he did. And so, and trying to hurry to get through this, there were a lot of challenges that my father went through. But he said in the beginning, my father and mother always put everything in prayer. And so he talked with my grandmother and said he was getting ready to launch on something that would cost him his job. And my grandmother asked him, did you pray on it? He said, yes. And she said, how do you feel? He said, I'm comforted with it. And so she said, well, go on. You're not making any money anyway, so you might as well go ahead. And if you lose your job, you always have a home. So he and Mr. Willis Gravely joined together, and my dad had talked Mr. Gravely into handling the equalization of teachers' salaries portion, and he would handle facilities. And they did have to do a lot of fighting. The two superintendents that were there, Mr. Haynes Bruce and then Mr. Frank Kreiser, they fought my dad tooth and nail on everything that he tried to do. But in every case, my dad went another route. And he had white people on his side too, because they knew it was not fair. And so they also kind of joined. And when Dr. Hickman said about the school burning down, and only 2 blocks, you could actually almost see the school from the fire station. Some thought maybe they were helping to let it burn down to help the project move forward, to get another school. But in the process, the superintendent did not want to cooperate to give them another school. And within a week's time, my dad had them in churches, he had them in the lodges and other places. But the superintendent fought it because he said they would have to spend $10 on those students and $10 on the facilities. After they won, kept fighting for the case, it always kind of bugged me that the superintendent, Frank Kreiser, said that he didn't want, that they were going to have to pay some kind of requirements in order to be set up in order to attend Christiansburg Institute. And his comment was because he didn't want them to simply be swamped with Negro pupils wanting to ride a bus to get to school. Now, why wouldn't they want to ride a bus to get 30 miles away to school? But he said they didn't want that many to swamp the bus at $10 a piece. So they did work it out, but in working it out, they only wanted 10 students. And those 10 students, they didn't want to come from Pulaski City. They wanted to come from the outskirts. So many of those students had to ride, pay to have somebody to bring them to Calfee. I think it was one person from Dublin and one person from Allisonia. And they had to pay $5 or so to get to Calfee in order to get the Christiansburg Institute. My mother was one of the 5 teachers who joined that suit. And this is my mother. My mother and father were not married at that time. My mother was Lucy Martin. And in Pulaski, you could not marry and teach in the same system. But they didn't marry until 1941, but this case was 1938. Following this case, when they did settle, the case would have picked up with the salaries, but it went to Eileen Black in Norfolk. Her case was very similar, but Norfolk was more of a metropolitan area and would have more African Americans to be in the situation too. So in 1939, moving from 1938 to 39, Eileen Black became more historical because we were on the back end of Virginia, Southwest Virginia. It was better to publicize the Norfolk case. The teachers that were in the lawsuit retained their jobs, but Mr. Willis Gravely and my dad, not my dad at that time, but he is my dad. They were literally dressed up fired. So they cut off the high school, so they would cut off the troublemakers, cut off Mr. Gravely and cut off Chauncey Harmon. And my dad had said in the beginning, he knew probably he would lose his job. It really hurt him to lose his job because he had to leave town and go to Pittsburgh. But he had said to Marshall that he did not mind losing the job because he had another profession. His father was a barber. And so my father knew how to cut hair. So he went to Pittsburgh, to Pennsylvania, to cut hair. But that's not what he was trained for. And they fixed it in the end that he would never be able to teach or be in the school system in Pulaski after this case. So they did that to both Mr. Gravely and to my dad. So it was a loss because my dad always wanted Pulaski to be in the forefront. And he said at Tuskegee, when they asked my mother where she was from when she came as a student, she said Pulaski, Virginia. And they said, where is this place? There's another student from Pulaski, his name is Chauncey Harmon, and he's smart. He skipped a grade. She said, if he skipped, I can skip, because I had the same teachers. They tested her and she did skip too. But my dad said at one point, he said, one day they'll know where Pulaski is. They'll know it's on the map. And as I've said before, I think the time is now. They know where Pulaski is, and they will know more with this project and how this project has developed. But it will be for the community at large, and it will deal with necessary needs of the community and education, and starting with the young. So I think both of my parents are smiling from above with the case, and the workmanship in this project has been just phenomenal. And it has grown each time we've had an opportunity to present it in some way. So I thank you for this opportunity. But we have always pushed for education. And at that time, look at the diploma, the size of the diploma. This is my dad's diploma from Calfee in 1929. My diploma is on a 9.5 by 12 by 9.5 or something like it. It's like 8.5 by 11. And this is a huge document. So it was very important to them to get an education. And in fact, when my dad went to Tuskegee as a child, he had to work his way through. And he worked in the coal yard, shoveling coal for 5 cents a ton in order to pay his tuition. And he saved up money so his siblings could come along too. So it was always working, but he always wanted to come back to Pulaski to make Pulaski a better place. And he always saw the students in Pulaski as his own. And he did that even when he moved on to other schools. It was always, these are my children. He made it very personal, my children. And if it was right, he didn't let anybody stop him or run over him, but there were major obstacles in the process. So I guess that's a quick review.
But we haven't got to Carver.
You want me to go to Carver? I was going to wait.
Please.
All right,
Please.
I'll move to Carver now.
Thank you.
And one thing about the two, the colors for Calfee, purple and gold. The colors for Carver, black and gold. So I'm a represent with just the gold. This is Roanoke County Educational. This was the school prior to Carver being built in 1940. And this was grade school A, located on what was known then as Water Street in Salem. And now it's South Broad Street. But Carver opened officially, started its building 1939 and it opened in 1940. It closed in 1966. I went to Carver from first grade to 12th grade. Carver was a consolidated school with all 12 grades, and students came from all over Roanoke County. And I was, I thought Queen was going to go before me. This is my first grade class, and I'm right here. And so, starting as a first grader, my brother had been to Calfee for first and second, so he came to Carver in third grade. But we had to go through obstacles too, to try to get students to the school, because in traveling, we had, the students had to come from a distance. If you look at this, Roanoke County, Carver was in Roanoke County, and the students came from Montgomery up to the Montgomery County line, the Franklin County line, the Bedford County line. Some of them got off of a Bedford bus and got on a Roanoke County bus. All of these students came from different areas. So some left at 5:45, 6 o'clock in the morning to get to Carver at 8. One year it snowed. It was around 62, 63. And it snowed and we couldn't get the bus back on Bent Mountain. So the students stayed in homes. So we had 8 and others had maybe 2 or 3. But we were a family. And that was another thing with Calfee. Because we were against all odds in many cases, we became a tight family. And Carver developed the Carver Reunion Association in 1976. After we integrated in 1966, they changed the name of the school. And that was common with African-American schools. The school in Bedford became Susie Gibson, and they changed that school. And just as of last year, I think it was, they gave that name back to that school. So it was always, things weren't good enough. Once we integrated, they had to change. Now, while we were at Carver, we had to always wait until Andrew Lewis used anything. Andrew Lewis was the white school 1 block up. And so our textbooks had to be used first by Andrew Lewis. And half the time when we got them, they were missing pages and all those kinds of things. But our teachers would insist that we become creative. So we used the telephone to call to have somebody to read a page. And my good friend Bentley, who is a medical doctor in White Plains, I would call her and she'd read the page to me and I'd read the page she was missing. but we had to have that assignment when we returned to school. And later, after they changed the name in 1977 to G.W. Carver, because we filed a petition to have that name put back on. When we were there, it was just called Carver School, and it was consolidated school, grades 1 through 12. When they renamed it G.W. Carver, and that's the name that's on it now. And it's elementary school now where we had it total. When we integrated, there were some schools that refused to have African Americans to come. I remember Clearbrook School denied a petition of 8 students who requested, I think it was around 1961, to attend Clearbrook, and they denied their attendance. Cave Spring deferred 8 students from attending. And so some of these students that came from all these outskirts areas, they lived right across the street from Cave Spring or William Byrd or other schools. So they were passing schools every day. And in 1994, the school board approved to renovate Carver to where it is now. Dr. Allen Seabrook came to one of our Carver reunion celebrations. And he was an invited guest because he was the superintendent, and he saw how much fun we were having. It didn't matter what ages we were, what classes that were attended there. And he said, this story needs to be told. And so later, Mike Stevens and I produced this Carver project. And with the DVD, we went through about 2,000 pictures in order to produce that. And it was about a 5-year attempt. We were fortunate that we were able to get at least 5 that were deceased by the time we finished it, that were former teachers or students. And we tried to get them from different areas. Though the principals that were there at Carver, the first principal was Mr. T.N. Williams, and Mr. Williams was the principal of the grade A school, the Roanoke County Training School. And then it was Mr. R. Rush Anderson, and my father replaced R. Rush Anderson. The one thing about R. Rush Anderson, he and Mr. Willis Gravely, who was at Calfee, were classmates. And my mother and Willis Gravely were classmates at Bluefield State. My father replaced R. Rush Anderson because he was killed in a car wreck. So my father became principal in 1953 until 1966 when the schools were integrated. So at Carver, we had all of the activities that the white schools had. We had top professionals. Our teachers, I would say 98% of them had master's degrees. One reason, the state of Virginia would pay them to go out of state rather than to be educated. Well, we lived maybe 2 streets from Roanoke College, but rather than to allow an African American to go to Roanoke College, Hollins, Radford, or whatever, they would pay for them to go out of state, give them a stipend, and let them go to a summer program and earn another degree. So both of my parents had master's degrees from Columbia University. We had other teachers who had theirs from the University of Pennsylvania, from where most of the time it was where they had relatives. So it was kind of like going for the summer and taking classes for a master's degree and having family reunion at the same time. But separate is never equal. It was not fair. Often we would have it was a farm team for the Pittsburgh Pirates in Salem, a ball team. and the Cubans would come to town. They were ball players, and they would stay at Miss Davenport's across the street. Orlando Cepeda became a famous Hall of Famer, and he could go and sit down in restaurants or in places in Salem. And we questioned that. Why? They said because he was a guest of America, but we were just born here, but he was a guest. So he was allowed to sit down in places where we couldn't. And then in some places, and it was in Pulaski too, that if you purchased something, you were charged a little bit extra because it was considered takeout. Well, you couldn't sit down, you couldn't eat inside, so you had to pay a little bit extra as takeout. So definitely it was not equal. And our community was a tight-knit community. Neighbors could tell you what to do. And if we did not obey the teacher at school, we probably would see that same teacher in Sunday school or at church. So they were always, the community was tight-knit. And school was a central point of activities that we had at Carver. And often we had a lot of students that would just stay over. And sometimes we'd have 8 or 10, and my mother would cook. And after we would clean up the kitchen, I'd put on my band uniform. My brother would put his band uniform on. My cousin would put her cheerleading outfit on. And so whatever we were going to the game to wear, to participate in, the home and the neighbors and the school became part of everybody's lives. And by my parents being friends with the teachers, some of the teachers would come home, and I said, oh no, I'll never get rid of them. They're following me home now. But they became very protective of us and pushing us to succeed. And so when I went to college, I didn't have a transition problem. And I went to a historically Black college, but it was about half and half racially balanced. Queen, I was hoping was going to be on. Queen was
on.
Hello. Oh, okay.
She's on. Yeah. So
I'm here. Oh, there you are. Okay. And so Queen can tell you what it was like for that transition, because she got caught up in the transition.
Queen, we can't hear you very well. I don't know if Rachel can do something to help.
I was waiting to see
Okay.
it now.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, there she is. Okay. Okay, so we were hoping that you would tell us a little bit about the transition when in 1966, when the big change took place and the African American students had
I'm working on it.
school. Can you hear me?
I hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, it was a little distorted. It seems a little better now. So if you could tell us a little about that time in your life.
Okay. Okay, I started Carver School in 1956 to 1966. That was from first grade to the 10th grade. Integration. Can you hear me?
It's still distorted. Do you think?
Are you hearing me?
Do you think your daughter could do something to improve the sound?
Okay.
Cobbs, you might
I started Carver in 1950.
Yeah, let's see. John, do you have an idea?
I think it might help if she turned off her video, and we might get I think we may have a bandwidth problem.
Yeah, okay. All right, so let's try now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Much better, much better. Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay. All right, let's try it again.
Yes,
You know,
let's try again.
good evening, everyone. Okay, my name is Queen Cobbs. My maiden name was Paige. I grew up on Bent Mountain, and I went to Carver School from 1956 until 1966, and that was the first through the 10th grade. Uh, Marilyn has hit on some points and all as to passing by Cave Spring High School. Um, we were riding a bus 18 miles one way, and all told together it was 36 miles for a day for us to come from Benton Mountain to go to Carver to be educated. When integration came along, then I went to Cave Spring at that time, intermediate school. But before that, my sister, one of my sisters was in a pilot program to see how integration would work. And she went there a year before, I guess, the whole total thing of integration came about. And so, like I said, we went there, and I graduated in 1968 from Cave Spring. We met some opposition, racial opposition and all. It wasn't much there in the school as it was riding the school bus from Benton Mountain going to school. We had trash thrown on us. We had also students to try to spit on us or whatever other like that. We were also called the N-word, you name it. Everything was thrown at us. But we were not deterred from going to get an education. And that's what we were riding that bus there for. And so there in the school system, I found that I was the only Black that was in a classroom, the only Black student that was in a classroom. Things were said, but you had to ignore it. As my mother said, she sent us to school to be educated. She didn't send us to school to fight or do anything like that. And so that's what we did. We ignored it. But we went back home and we told what happened for that day. Some of the students were nice. They would help me out with some of the work or whatever like that had to be done and all. But I can say I did not have any real bad experience being starting at Cave Spring and all. But like I said, most of our racial things was on the school bus coming from Benton Mountain. The students didn't want you to sit beside them. And when you would get on the bus, there's one female student in particular. She was sort of jumping to the side and not wanting you to brush up against her or whatever. And she did not hesitate to be just ugly and use, racial slurs or whatever, as if she was going to catch something from us or our skin color was going to rub off on or whatever. But
Whoops. We might have lost you.
went to Cave Spring, graduated in 1968, and welcomed the education. And as Marilyn said, a difference in the schools, I would say, like she said, we were like family there at Carver. And we did whatever was done to help each other out and all. We were taken in. She brought up about the snowstorm. I won't ever forget that year. And we got snowed off of Benton Mountain. We could not go back home. Yeah. And so the bus took us back to the school. When we got back there, the parents that lived there in Salem, we had a nice, good hot meal. And I do remember that ham. I'm going to tell you, ham and green beans. We were really fed. They had us to line up and walk in front of the camera. So we were on the news. So the parents would see that, hey, your children are okay. Your children are okay.
You're gone again.
Yeah.
So, like I said, riding the bus from Bent Mountain going to Carver, 18 miles one way, that was something else. But as Marilyn addressed, we were family, we were well taken care of. I want to say that in going to Carver, the difference between that and going to Cave Spring, which at that time was an all-white school, you did not get the loving, nurturing that we received when we were going to Carver. And as she said, you know, the parents cared, the teachers cared, and they not only taught you book learning, but they taught you more values. And they also taught you how to have respect. Do your best and be your best, no matter what it was that you were doing or what you were going out to be in the future. They expected you to do your best and excel at that. And that's what we did. And it's just a time for me, you know, I won't ever.
So I'd like to
Cave Spring. I mean, you learn different things, and you know, the education was different, but
this doesn't work very well. So if I could just ask Dr. Harmon a question, well, we're hoping she'll come back, which is,
and by going to Carver and learning, I guess, from the teachers and all that were there, I did the same thing with the students that I work with. As I told them, I didn't mistreat my children. I will not mistreat you. And I loved them, and I worked with them, and I treated them as if they were my own. I saw they were going wrong, I would let them know. I would bring school supplies and take care of them, you know, those that didn't have and or whatever I like that. And I told them, I said, don't make me your enemy. I'm your friend, and you use me. And anything that they needed, a student needed or whatever, I would go all out of my way to do that. So, but you know, that's my take on this segregation part. But in that, I'm going to say I had another sister, a younger sister. She was bused all the way to Glenville. We don't know why, but she was bused to Glenville, whereas myself and another sister, we went to Cave Spring. So the busing thing still continued. Instead of sending all three of us to Cave Spring, they sent her to Glenville, and just the two of us went to went to Cave Spring and all. But it was a learning experience and all. But like I said, the racial, I guess, where we ran into the race thing was on the school bus coming from Benton Mountain. The students there at Cave Spring, like I said, it was a little bit of it, but you had to just pass it up and keep going.
So I'm wondering if we could just have a few minutes for questions now of
Okay.
anybody. I think I have understood from hearing about the Christiansburg Institute that when integration came, the teachers at those schools did not find employment at the school to which the students were being transferred. Is that true? So the teachers, then you didn't have many African American teachers at Cave Spring or whichever school you had to go to.
In most systems, including Pulaski in '66, they sent the teachers to different schools. Seldom did they have more than one African American per school. My mother went to Academy Street from Carver, but most of the teachers were also classroom teachers when we were at Carver. But when integration came, they put them into the white schools and they became reading teachers.
That's what I thought.
Or the those principals became in charge of busing or in charge of transportation or other things, which was, we had more African-American principals when we were in school, like when Queen and I were in school, but when integration came, after they retired, they were not rehired, not African-Americans hired. But in most cases, except for Mrs. DeBerry and Pulaski, she fought to be a classroom teacher. Many of the others were put into reading teachers a position, which was an important position, but it was not that having a classroom like they had before.
So I want to point out that in 2021, these school systems are going on and on about finding African-American teachers for their schools.
We're going to Case Spring. There were no African-American teachers at Case Spring that I recall. Every teacher was white.
And I taught at Glen Cove, I think, for 8 years or 9 years before another African-American came. And we had 2 African-American students at that school. So it was many of the students that went to Case Spring or William Byrd or other schools, they had been involved in plays and concerts and all of that. So when they went to the white schools, they weren't good enough. So they couldn't be a cheerleader right now, not right now.
No.
They couldn't be in the band or the choir, where that was our livelihood. We were looking forward to going to choir rehearsal, or band rehearsal, and competitions and all those kinds of things. But that was kind of cut off.
So I feel I've monopolized these questions. Are there other questions from people who still remain with us? Could you put it in the chat or just talk? Okay.
I have a question.
All right, great.
So you've talked about how things changed when integration came. Do you feel like we lost something or we lost ground? I mean, I've even heard people say that integration in some respects really hurt us as African Americans. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we lost. And in some cases, many of the students are still upset about not having had the opportunity to finish Carver. We gain more material, things that we didn't have, but we lost a whole lot of fiber, as Queen said, with the teachers and the pushing and the moral side and respect. I think we lost.
I interject something here. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are.
My story was different, and when I went to Pulaski High my sophomore year, I naturally thought I wasn't wanted. When I first got there, I was placed in lower track. Even though I had all A's and B's, I was placed in lower track classes. And I thought this was great. After the first 6 weeks grading period, I had more than 100 average in 4 of my 6 classes. So I thought this was great. After that, I met with guidance counselor, and they put me in the faster track classes. But my point is, I had a couple of teachers. I like sports. I had a basketball coach that kept 4 black players on the varsity basketball team. That was unheard of in 1966 at a white school. And so we went there, and we were a big Negro presence and all. And so that was uncommon. I had a couple of social studies teachers that sort of adopted me, and they pushed me. They even brought me a college application to Whitfield Community College and had me fill it out in their presence and all. My parents were talking about maybe me going to the military or something and getting a career there. had it not been for those white teachers sort of adopting me, taking me under their wing, I probably would have turned out differently and all. So it was, I don't want you to think it was all negative. I've said this before, the people were better than the system
Yes.
and all. And so
Yes.
individuals,
Yes. Yes.
like I said, these teachers knew my assignments. I had to bring my report cards around every grading period. They knew if I had a paper, I had to bring it to them, and they said, "You can do better than this, Mickey." And so that was my story, and I certainly gained. And so my story individually is different from a lot of blacks and all, just because it's on a personal basis. So I thought you should hear that perspective as well.
I think the turn of phrase, the people were better than the system, that's what really is a ray of hope in the whole thing. So Nancy Morris would like to know, how were Black teachers received by other faculty members in the white schools?
I think half and half. My mother didn't have too much problems with the change in connecting with teachers at Academy Street. And of course, the classroom situation from a reading teacher was a little different too. Later, she ended up going back to Carver after Carver changed, integrated. But she was at Academy Street for a while. But she became friends with quite a few of the teachers. And of course,
Right.
in the beginning, at one of the teachers' meetings, they wanted inquisitively to find out about the Black teachers. And they said, how many have a normal professional? And my mother said, everybody stood up. And then they said, well, how many have bachelors? And then the African Americans were standing up and they said, well, how many have a master's? And then it was all these African Americans, and they just stopped. And because some had postgraduate, and many of them just had a normal professional degree.
Sure.
But it was always trying to find out, well,
Sure.
who are you, and what? Tell us more about you.
Yeah. But that would also just because of the distance, the cultural distance. I mean, they really didn't know. But anyway, it has a happy ending in that your mother was comfortable there. So
I think other teachers were accepted, some more than others. You're always going to have somebody that's going to be on the other side, but the majority.
Okay, I think if there are some more questions, maybe one or two, because we've exceeded our time now.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
If I may. My sister, speaking of teachers and all, my sister that was in the pilot program at Case Spring before integration took place and all like that, she ended up going back to Carver, where she had gotten part of her education and ended up being a science teacher. And Marilyn had mentioned about Roanoke College and Hollins College and all. Her, along with two of my other sisters, they graduated from Roanoke College, and they end up getting their master's degrees. So, like I said, we've come a long ways and all like that. But like I said, my sister ended up going back to where she started from and ended up being a science teacher there at Carver.
Well, these are very nice stories. So is there anybody else? Okay, let's see. Oh, okay. There's a link for Calfee and for the Adair Theater, which is in the chat. Yes? It's not in the chat. Okay.
Yes, it's in the chat.
It's in the
Ruth,
chat.
can Ruth, can I make one more point?
Of course.
About Calfee.
Yeah.
I told you about the presence of the NAACP and Calfee's story.
Yes.
That Thurgood Marshall, Spotswood Robinson, Oliver Hill all came to Pulaski with that organization. Well, if you go to the NAACP right now and look in their organization, their number 2 person, his name is Leon Russell. Leon was a year behind me at Calfee. He's from Pulaski, Virginia. And so now he's
Picture of Leon.
chairman of the National Board of Directors. And I just think that's a great story, a circle where you have those lawyers being so present and working with Calfee. Now the number 2 guy in that organization went to Calfee Training School in Pulaski.
Wow, that's wonderful. Okay, one last question from anyone or a comment? Then I think we should wrap up. I just love the stories of for instance, the courage of your father, keeping going in that way, and that's how things change. That is
At
wonderful.
25 years old.
Yes, that's wonderful.
Very courageous.
Yes, yes. Anybody else?
Perhaps Jill might like to spotlight the Cultural Center now and the play that's coming up very quickly.
Of course, please. Yes, thank you. Is Jill there?
I see her, but
Okay. Well, she should, if Jill would speak, please.
I taught at Pulaski High School in the early 1980s. So I was very interested to come here and hear your stories.
Well, nice. Okay. So we did want to hear a little bit about the current project at Calfee, please, Jill.
Well, if Jill's not there, maybe she'll come. I can talk a little bit about it.
Please.
We're bringing it back with 6 different utilities, repurposes. A child care center. We're naming that after Marilyn's parents. It's the Lucy Chauncey Harmon Child Care Center, Learning Center. We're having a museum. It's the African American Heritage Center at Calfee. It's going to commemorate all those teachers, talk about the students, about the local African American history there in Pulaski County and all. So we're going to commemorate that history. We're going to have an event center and what used to be the auditorium / cafeteria. It's going to be named the Broadno Baker Event Center. And that's after 2 individuals. I think Broadno ended up being a band director at William Fleming High School after he left Calfee and all. But he and Mary T. Baker was another elementary teacher there. We're going to have a community kitchen in the old kitchen, and that'll serve not only the child care center, but organizations like Beans and Rice and the Daily Bread will use our kitchen and things as partners. We're going to have meeting space, rooms and things like that can be rented out. And then Dorothy Venable was my 2nd grade teacher, and she's still living. And she has her own interesting story. We're going to have a digital computer lab, and we're naming that the Dorothy DeBerry Venable Digital Learning Lab and all. So and then we're going to have out on the outside campus, we're going to have youth play spaces, outdoor natural play spaces and things, and going to cater mainly to young people, but also to senior citizens and things with the things that we're going to offer. So we're going to offer all these utilities and our rework. So I don't know if Jill's there or not, but we had a nice video that kind of highlights that, but that's what we're very ambitious. And we've had Senator Warner come to our school. We've had several state senators and representatives visit us. And about 2 weeks ago, we had the First Lady of the state, Governor Northam's wife, come and visit Calfee. So we've had a lot of people interested in our project. We've been the subject of an NPR radio story that went national. We've been highlighted the story, lead story in two magazines, the Dogwood and oh, I forget the other, the Colors magazines out of Roanoke. So we're doing quite well, and people are very interested in our project. Thank you, Ruth, for giving me this opportunity.
That's wonderful, and I hope that people will go to the Calfee site, get more information, and some of them find it in their hearts to make a donation. Thank
Ruth,
you.
I think I can share the video.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and start it, and I hope this
Sure.
works.
Okay.
It's only about 5 minutes.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Haley Taylor, and I'm the youngest member of the Calfee Community and Cultural Center.
We can't see it, John.
Part of the reason that I joined the CCCC is because I really wanted to be a part of something bigger than myself. I was really interested in the board, not only
See it now?
my grandmother,
We can, yes.
she herself has also been on several boards. So I was like, you know, it seems pretty cool to do the same things that my grandma did when I was 5 and 6 and 7. When I was an intern, we talked mainly about why Calfee started and how it was born out of segregation, but it progressed and it became something that was so much more. I think a lot of alum described it as a second family. So it was just really interesting to see that and to also learn about the history that I've never heard of. Like I'd heard about Thurgood Marshall, but I had no clue that he was in Pulaski. Chauncey Harmon had actually corresponded with Thurgood Marshall in an attempt to create a lawsuit for equal funding with all Black students in the county. Chauncey Depew Harmon was appointed principal of Calfee Training School, and he himself was actually a native of Pulaski. In 1949, the struggle continued, and Black parents won their lawsuit against the Pulaski County School Board, which was ordered to give Black students improved facilities. This is one of 6 cases won by Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP that led up to the Brown versus Board of Education. Normally, when people think of Black history, they think Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, slavery, it's kind of it. So I think people just need to be more aware of it. And it was just really nice to be part of something that brought it to light and revitalized the history of that. The goal of the CCCC is to raise funding in order to preserve the building and its
Now we lost the sound. John, I think we should end it because we lost the sound unless you can get it back.
Lips. you can go on Facebook and look up Calfee Community and Cultural Center. You can get that video.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much. I learned a whole lot. And so thank you to all the people that educated us this evening, and we hope you'll join in other justice advocates events in the future.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to all.
Thanks to all. Yes. Bye-bye.
Victoria, you can have it back now, honey. Victoria.